Hello there, my name is Torias, and in this video I will be reviewing and ranking every single thing I saw in 2021. So 2021 has been an interesting year for me. I had been really bored at the beginning of the year. The whole first chunk of the year I had nothing to do. I was unemployed, I was out of work, I wasn't in school or anything like that, so I had decided to make a gigantic list of things, shows, movies, anime, whatever, that I wanted to watch. So I made a list of shows, movies, anime that I wanted to watch, and then I slowly went through it. I watched lots and lots of, especially anime, that I had been meaning to get around to for a long time. And in this year, I finally managed to do it. I finally managed to watch way more shows than I think I usually do in a year. And so initially I thought it would be a good idea, just because of the type of person that I am, to review every show that I watched, to give it some sort of basic rating so that I could compare them just for my own sake, because I didn't even really plan on making a video about it. And then comes right around to the end of the year, I had this giant list of shows that I had seen and reviewed, and I thought, hey, that would make a really cool video. It would be a really cool idea if I had put all of the shows that I'd seen this year into a giant tier list and I ranked them. So on screen is a giant tier list of every single show that I've seen this year, and you'll notice that it is primarily anime shows, and I'm going to go through it, rank and review each and every show, and tell you my thoughts on them. Now, if it isn't obvious already, this is one of my first unscripted videos. I am just completely flying off the cuff here, so I don't really know what I'm going to say about each of these shows, and I have no idea how long this video is going to be. So just for my own sanity, and probably for yours too, I have put each review that I will be doing in a time code in the description in case you want to skip ahead to any specific review, or you want to skip any specific chunk of the video. And just before I get into the reviews themselves, I do want to explain my review system, because I did decide to create my own. Because I really am not a big fan of number rankings, 1 to 100, 1 to 10, and I really don't like the classical tier list system of like an S through F rank, like a school grade. Because to me, when I want to rank something, and the reason why in my previous review videos of movies and shows that I've seen that I haven't done a ranking at the end, is because I don't like the typical format of rankings, because I think that they compare everything too much, and there's too much of a focus on some sort of objective quality. I don't know what makes a show an 8 as opposed to a 7, and I also tend to also enjoy movies that are low ranking in terms of competency above movies that are well made, just because the movie is more entertaining. So instead of any sort of objective review of 1 to 10, 1 out of 100, S through F, I have decided to create my own review system that is purely based on my enjoyment of the show that I watched and how much I would recommend it. So on screen, you can see my 5 rankings that I've decided to use to categorize every show that I've seen, and it is purely just based on how much I would recommend the show to someone else. So at the bottom of the list, I have a rejection, which is to say, not only do I not recommend the show, but I would recommend that you avoid it. These are for things that I have not enjoyed, shows that I didn't like, and anything that I just think that I don't want anyone else to watch. One step above that is no opinion or no recommendation, which is just to say that it's not a bad show, it's not something that I disliked at all, but I felt nothing watching it, or there was as many things I liked as things I didn't. And this is more to say that if this show is something that's interesting to you, then by all means watch it, but it's just not something I would ever rewatch again. It's sort of like saying, I wouldn't necessarily seek this show out to watch it, but also if it came on television and I had nothing better to do, then yeah, it's not going to be terrible. A step above that is a light recommendation, which is to say I enjoyed it, I would recommend it to you. There wasn't anything particularly amazing about it. This is sort of where I would put all of the quote-unquote popcorn movies, or like turn your brain off shows, something that's generally enjoyable but just doesn't have like too many good or great things going for it. And a step above that is a medium recommendation, which is a very solid review. I would say any show that I put here or above is something that is highly recommended by me, something that I think that you should watch. And a medium recommendation is just to say that I really enjoyed this thing, but it's not perfect. It's not something that I look at and go, oh, this affected me greatly emotionally, or it didn't necessarily like strike a chord with me, but I did really enjoy it and it's really well made, or if it's not well made, it's very entertaining at least. And then, of course, at the top is a strong recommendation. This is for my favorite shows of all time. These are anything that I would consider quote unquote perfect, a sort of 9 or 10 out of 10, just amazingly well made. I really, really enjoyed it. Something that is rewatchable for me, just any sort of like amazing work. But anyway, I think I have adequately, hopefully, explained my review system. So let's get into the actual reviews. So up first in the movies category, we have possibly one of the worst movies I've seen, not only this year, but in a very long time, which is Space Jam 2. And if you haven't already seen it, I have made an entire video on Space Jam 2, and I try to explain in detail why it's so terrible. It is just incredibly poorly made and soulless. Like, the CGI is good, the direction is all there, but in terms of actual writing competency or like getting me to feel emotion, this movie fails categorically. I just didn't enjoy it that much. I liked the original Space Jam as it was when I was a kid, but I didn't think it was an amazing movie. And the second one is just an obvious cash grab. It's a movie to make action figures, essentially. So Space Jam 2 definitely gets a strong rejection. I could not recommend that you avoid this movie enough. Just don't watch it. It's not good. Though the next movie is The Suicide Squad, which is James Gunn's, I guess, sequel. I don't know if it's a sequel. I don't know if it's a retcon of the original. I guess it is a sequel because there's characters from the original, like Captain Boomerang and Harley Quinn, who like talk to each other like the original Suicide Squad happened. The original Suicide Squad, if you don't know, from 2016, would definitely be a rejection on my list. It was fucking awful. I hate that movie. But The Suicide Squad is pretty fucking good. I honestly really enjoyed this movie. I thought it was competently made. It was really funny. It has that James Gunn humor. And more so than Guardians of the Galaxy, I think I enjoyed the humor because it was much, much darker. It's sort of that black humor that I really enjoy, that something else on this list, The Boys, also has in spades. There is just something so cathartic to me about the opening scene of this movie that, if you don't know, is a lot of death. There's a lot of death involved in the opening, and I just really fucking enjoy it. I really enjoy that type of like comedy around main characters dying in a movie. It's just something that you don't see that much, and I can't think of many other movies that do. So I just really enjoyed The Suicide Squad. And on the list, I would honestly give it, I think, probably a medium recommendation. It was very strong, very enjoyable, and I would say it is elevated somewhat just by the message or like the themes of being a superhero. Like, there is actual themes and sort of a deeper thing going on here than just watching characters die and like, haha, funny gore and the shark dude eats people. So I would give it a medium recommendation. Following The Suicide Squad, we have The Lighthouse, which I had only gotten around to seeing this year. I think it had come out last year. I don't actually remember, but I only saw it this year. And I remember it was an amazing time because when I watched this movie for the first time, a movie that I had heard was incredibly bleak and very, very artistic, and that like it's not going to make sense the first time you see it. I had decided to watch this with my dad, who, if you don't know, is someone who I think his favorite movie of all time is Step Brothers. He enjoys Will Ferrell comedies and like old people media. And he is very much someone who he has a very hard time understanding artsy movies, because I also remember, as well as seeing The Lighthouse with him previously, I had seen I forget which one it was, but we had seen a Charlie Kaufman movie together, and he looked at me the entire time. He would just like keep looking at me and just going like, is this supposed to make sense? And it's actually really cool because when he watched The Lighthouse, he would give me those looks sometimes of like, what the fuck is happening? Like, what's going on here? And I would have a similar expression because this movie is very weird and artistic. But I found during like the last 30 minutes of the movie, both of our eyes were just glued to the screen because it reaches a point past weird where it just becomes like raw, and like raw emotion is coming through the screen, and it just becomes this like transcendental experience, to say the least. And so it was very, very good. I thoroughly enjoy The Lighthouse. I think it's a really, really good movie. I'm not going to give it a strong recommendation. I feel like if this, again, were a ranking of just competency of like how well the movie is made, then yeah, this is like a 10 out of 10 movie. It's like almost perfect in how it's made. But it's not a movie that I want to rewatch very soon. It is a movie that's like, okay, maybe I should rewatch it in order to like get it more, but the the feelings that you get watching this movie are not feelings that I like want to experience again, because it is just like very raw and like hard to understand on purpose. So I do also give The Lighthouse a medium recommendation, which is just now incredibly funny for me to see The Lighthouse and The Suicide Squad ranked on the same scale. But again, like I said, this is not on any sort of terms of competency. It's just how much I enjoyed it and how much I would recommend it. Like, obviously The Lighthouse is better made than The Suicide Squad. I don't think I have to tell you that, but I enjoyed it about the same amount because The Suicide Squad was a lot more fun. And speaking of the antithesis to fun, I've seen Dune this year, Dune 2021, directed by, how did I say his name? Denis Villeneuve. I don't know if it's Villeneuve or Villeneuve, but whatever. Directed by Dennis, good friend Dennis. He is a really good filmmaker. I really like Blade Runner 2049. I think pretty much all of his films that I've seen, I've loved. I'm excited. I'm so excited. Probably more than any other movie that I can think of. I am excited for Dune Part 2 because I think with the complete story that this is going to be an amazing, amazing film series. But the first part of it does have some flaws, and also it's the part 1, so it's not like the climax of the movie. Yes, there's an interesting action scene, and like this movie does have a climax, but it's not the climax of the Dune story. So I feel like part 2 is definitely going to be more enjoyable to me than part 1 is, because part 1 is just a setup. It's like, how would I rank the first half of The Hobbit? You know what I mean? But it does get on my list a medium recommendation, and I really liked it. Honestly, maybe even a strong recommendation, but I would have to come back next year and rank it with Dune Part 2, because Dune Part 2 I think is going to make it the complete package that I'm really going to love. And they could still fuck up Part 2, who knows? I trust Dennis, but he's not infallible, so we'll see. Speaking of being fallible though, we have The Eternals, which was the most vanilla movie I think I've ever seen. And I did also make a video on Eternals if you want to watch that. Surprisingly, or unsurprisingly, I think a lot of the shows that I'm covering here, I've made a video on. There is some good to it. I think there is some good things to Eternals. I'm just kind of sick of Marvel movies. Like pretty much since Endgame came out, I've just been so fatigued by I'm not going to see Black Widow. I don't care about the new Spider-Man movie that much, but Eternals was not the movie that changed my mind on this. This movie was completely boring. If you somehow haven't seen a superhero movie before, sure, maybe, but I don't know why you'd start here. And honestly, this is probably the definition of no opinion, because I cannot think of positive or negative things to say about it. It is just it's a complete flat line. And up next, we move into the television shows that I've seen, starting with Invincible, which is another superhero show, though Invincible and the show after it, The Boys, are both in the realm of anti-superhero media, or like at least cynical superhero media, where it's taking the general conceptions that you have about a superhero show and flipping it on its head. I think Invincible was really, really good. I think that I really enjoyed it, especially when it did flip conventions on their head. And I think the biggest thing for me was just how emotional it still felt with all of that cynicism. Because if you don't know the plot of Invincible, I mean, first of all, I would say if you haven't seen Invincible and you don't want to be spoiled on it, just watch the first episode, because it kind of perfectly encapsulates the show better than any first episode I've seen of most shows. And if you don't like the first episode, you're probably not going to like the whole show. But that first episode is amazing. I really loved it. The last chunk of the episode was probably one of the coolest scenes I've seen, and definitely one of my favorite superhero media scenes of all time. And the rest of the show kind of follows in that suit, though not as much. I feel like, again, it was a season 1, just kind of how I feel with Dune, like it sets up for something greater. And there's not really a whole lot of climax. I'm gonna say climax a lot. It's my new favorite word. But there's not a whole lot of just popping off, you know what I mean? There was a lot of cool things that happened. I think is it the last episode or the second last episode with the train scene that everyone knows? I think that was amazing. But the in-between of it was a little boring and was a little nah. Any superhero show where they have to go to fucking high school in between, I want to sleep. I want to like actually just fall asleep when I'm watching it. So this show did have enough spikes of energy to keep me interested in it during like the flat lines of just boring high school college shit that they went through. But I'm So I think this show is definitely a light recommend to me. I did really enjoy some parts of it. I think if you were to make a supercut, like a 30-minute supercut of all of the best parts of the show, I would say, yeah, that's amazing. You need to watch this. But a lot of the stuff in between was kind of just like, okay, watchable, sure. I'm very fatigued on that sort of thing, but it was pretty good. So definitely a light recommend. And following Invincible is the show that probably single-handedly caused Invincible to get made into a television show, at least, which is The Boys, which, if you don't know, is another dark, cynical, anti-superhero show, though it is much more cynical, to the point of the entire show almost having like a black comedy feeling to it, whereas Invincible felt more like a genuine attempt. Like, Invincible still felt like a superhero show, just one that had like a reverse premise. The entirety of The Boys feels like it is anti-superhero. Like, you can tell that the creator of the original comics, Garth Ennis, just fucking hates superheroes and wants to see them die and loves to see them do shitty things and loves to paint them in a bad light. So I think that it goes much further in that direction, which I did enjoy, but it also in a way takes away from it a lot, because it is more cynical, so there's less room to have genuine like emotional growth. Like, I care infinitely less about Huey from The Boys and what his passions and goals are, or like even about him surviving. I care way less about that than I do about Mark from Invincible, because the show Invincible is much more genuine about Mark and like how he's growing as a character, whereas The Boys just feels way too cynical to ever let any character breathe. But I did overall like it. I think it was very, very good. I think that, again, the supercut like highlights of the show are amazing, and like some of them would have me like shocked and laughing at the same time, which is again a rare emotion and goes with the Suicide Squad in terms of just like the level of brutality that they're willing to show, which I love, because we just haven't really seen that before, even though, ironically, anti-superhero shows are now getting oversaturated, because I think there was like a Netflix one that came out that was about like evil superheroes based on a comic book, and I just couldn't care less about that one. But The Boys was very good. I would put it as a light recommend, just along with Invincible, though obviously for different reasons. The Boys you enjoy because it's so cynical and it's just like ripping on superheroes all the time, whereas Invincible is a darker superhero show, but it is still genuinely about a superhero and like his struggles. Moving on from The Boys, and I think all of the superhero shows, I think that's pretty much it with that. We have Squid Game, which is probably the show that defined 2021. I think if you were to point to any, not only show, but just like piece of media that came out this year, I think Squid Game was like single-handedly the most recognizable thing. Not only was it watched a whole bunch, it inspired a YouTube video by Mr. Beast that I didn't see because I don't care about Mr. Beast content. And there was a video game made on it that I saw people playing on Twitch. Like, this was huge. It was all over TikTok when I was on TikTok. It was like the biggest cultural phenomenon, and for good reason, because it is an amazing show. I love Squid Game. I think it is very, very good and very well made. It, having seen Parasite, which came out, I think 2 years ago, 2019, maybe. Whenever Parasite came out, I saw Parasite, and I've seen that movie twice, maybe 3 times now. Loved it, and Squid Game hit all of the same notes for me. It is very weird that all of the famous Korean media seem to be anti-capitalist. Like, that's an interesting thing to see. But I did love Squid Game for a lot of the same reasons that I love Parasite, which is just that it's very, like, the cinematography is amazing. It just looks so professionally made. The acting is phenomenal, and the message of the show just like hits you. It hits you pretty hard, and you immediately go, oh, I get this. This is dark. This is like a serious critique of society. But I did really, really enjoy it, and it is hard to separate it from like the meme that it's become. But I did really enjoy Squid Game, and I really recommend it if you haven't seen it already. Just an amazingly well put together live action drama about people and about capitalism and about money and debt and the depths that people will go to. Very, very well made. I would put it in a medium recommend, not in a strong recommend, purely just for the reason that I think it did sort of fall apart at the end. There was a little bit at the end that I feel took away from the message of the show, just in terms of like, I don't know, the clumsiness in which it was made. For example, anyone who's seen the show, the English voice actors for the like really rich elite people at the end of the show like completely took me out of the show. It was so bad. And I think a lot of stuff like that kind of sprinkled throughout the show just took it away from that strong recommend or that like perfect score that I would give this. So that's why it's a medium. And speaking of incredibly well-made television, we have Mindhunter, made by my favorite director, I think possibly of all time. It's a tie between him and a couple others, but I've definitely loved his work since I first saw it, which is David Fincher. Love everything that man has made, and what he makes is dark, edgy serial killer shows. I think everything from like Seven to like Zodiac is just perfect. It's just really well made. And Mindhunter is no different. But if you don't know, it is a dark drama show following the real events, though dramatized, of a psychologist for the FBI who interrogates or like tries to talk to serial killers and kind of understand the mentality or mindset that they have in order to solve future crimes by understanding how these serial killers operate in order to sort of map out why they kill. And it's real fucking dark and very tense and incredibly well made, and maybe one of the only shows on this list that I can say had me on the edge of my seat and made it sometimes hard to breathe. It was like actually very, very intense, and I really love Mindhunter. It's so good. The guy who plays Ed Kemper, I think his name is, the actor who plays him in this show, is like, give that man every Oscar or whatever the fuck, the Emmy, whatever the fuck the version is for television shows. Give him every award that you possibly can because it's amazing. But Mindhunter is fantastic, and oh my god, it's like the best show on Netflix. So with that being said, this is my first strong recommend. This show's amazing. It's pretty much perfect in every way to me. I love it so much. You need to watch it if you like anything dark and creepy. If you like any of those like serial killer documentaries about like Ted Bundy or whatever, this is that turned up to 11. It's phenomenal. And moving on from there, we get back to the sort of theme of, I guess, my taste in shows, which is sci-fi and like more fantastical things, with The Expanse. So The Expanse is a sci-fi television show that is, it's very hard to describe because when you say sci-fi, I think a lot of people's immediate first thought goes to Star Wars or Star Trek or something more like fantastical. But The Expanse, the reason I love it is because it's so grounded. There's even a part in the show I remember very vividly where, if you don't know, it's about colonizers on different planets, and we've sort of colonized Mars, and we're now kind of colonizing the Outer Reach, and there's this sort of faction war going on between the planets, but it's in the year like 2300 or something like that, so it's still relatively not that far in the future, and technology is like, space travel has been invented, but we still have like a relative cell phone, and we still have like sort of modern technology. And so a lot of the sci-fi in the show and a lot of the elements of it are just incredibly realistic, incredibly well done, and it becomes this more serious drama about people and sort of explores almost just an incredible realistic scenario of like what might happen in a couple hundred years. And I remember, just to point out the specifics of like how great the detail in this show is, there's an episode in like season 4, maybe it's in one of the later seasons, where a character is out in space and their helmet cracks, and they get this giant crack along their like space visor spacesuit helmet, and they take the helmet off, and my immediate first thought was like, oh shit, they're dead, like they're done, because what I'd heard about space is like you take your helmet off, you die instantly. And they take their helmet off and exhale all of the air, so like they exhale all of the air out of their lungs and just fully breathe out, take the helmet off while holding their breath, and then like grab like a backup like visor thing and put that on the helmet and put it back on. And I'm like, that can't be real. Like, you can just take your helmet off in space and survive for like a couple seconds. And I Google it, and you can survive in space for like 12 seconds without a helmet, I guess. If you let all of the air out of your body so it doesn't just get sucked out of your lungs, you can just like survive in space for a little bit before passing out or like dying of hypothermia because it's so cold. So they had researched this and then put it in the show. And then I'm finding this out and going like, whoa, I didn't know that. That's amazing. And I'm going and telling people about this show and about that scene because it's so cool to me. So like, that's just an example of like the crazy amount of detail in this show. The show is amazing. On top of just the crazy amount of detail, there is actually just phenomenal characters. Some of like the coolest characters I think I've seen in a show, where you just love them. Like, they're charismatic and they're just a ragtag kind of group of people. There's nothing I love more, I think, in this world than a ragtag group of people on a spaceship. It's why I love Cowboy Bebop, it's why I love Firefly, and it's why I love The Expanse. and all of the main characters are incredibly fleshed out, and it is a show that is incredibly futuristic and science fiction-y. It is fantastical, and yet large portions of the show are just dedicated to characters talking to each other and exploring emotion and themes and how they feel, and it just works very, very well. And the newest season is actually airing, I think, right around the time that I'm recording this video, season 6, I believe, but I had seen seasons 1 through 5. And pretty much I binge watched the entire show this year. I'd only just now kind of gotten into it. And I think that you should watch it. I think that you should absolutely get into it. Easily some of my favorite characters in a show and how they explore it. The plot is intricate and just amazing. So The Expanse is definitely on my strong recommend. I would honestly say that it is the greatest sci-fi that I've seen. I love it more than Star Wars. I like it more than Star Trek, more than Battlestar Galactica and Doctor Who. Like, it's the best sci-fi to me. And I just love this franchise, and I don't think it gets enough love. So it's just crazy to me, like, how few people actually know about this show and how good it is. And moving on from an amazing sci-fi show to we have Cowboy Bebop, the Netflix live-action version. And I've just made my most recent video before this one, a video on Cowboy Bebop, and my thoughts on it are pretty obvious, I think, from like the first 10 seconds of that video, that I did not like it. It was not that good. I think there's a lot of flaws with Cowboy Bebop. There's a lot wrong with it, and a lot of things that they changed that I don't like, things that are just weird, because it's like taking an original, it's copying homework without knowing why you're copying it. You know, you just changed a couple of the words around, and it just feels really weird and really not that Cowboy Bebop to me, and I didn't really like it. And I have a whole video explaining why I didn't like it that much. It's like 30 minutes long if you want to actually hear my full thoughts on it. But what I didn't think got across too well in that video is like how brainlessly enjoyable it is, because it is a show that whenever I wasn't thinking about how bad it had turned Cowboy Bebop, I was just genuinely kind of vibing with it. It was kind of enjoyable. There was a lot of fun parts to it, and some of the parts that they had adapted even were like, all right, this is kind of all right, I guess. It's not a faithful adaptation, and I don't think it does Cowboy Bebop justice, which is why we've just now found out that the second season is canceled. So I think it's a pretty unanimous decision that this show was not great. But I did like it, and I would say I would, of course, recommend the original Cowboy Bebop higher than the Netflix live action version. But I think if you're someone who just loves like kind of dumb Netflix shows, like if you're someone who could like binge watch like Riverdale or whatever and like just not give a shit about it, sure, the show's fine. The show is the Riverdale of space, which is probably the worst connection that I could possibly put to it, but it's not terrible. It's okay, solidly okay, and solidly just kind of dumb fun. So I would honestly give it a light recommendation, which is probably going to be surprising to anyone who's seen my video on it, because I really trashed on it in that video. But I did only trash on it because I compared it to the original, which is what I'm reviewing next. And this also marks the transition now for the rest of this video. I will be covering specifically anime, because that was most of what I had wanted to get into. I had been into anime for a long time, watched, I mean, a good amount of shows, but I hadn't like fully got into it. When people talk about anime or I watch anime YouTube videos, I didn't get a lot of the references. So this was the year I'm like, I'm getting into anime and just fucking watching everything. And a show that I did rewatch for the video that I made on Cowboy Bebop was Cowboy Bebop. The original Cowboy Bebop is probably the greatest, well, maybe not the greatest, but it is definitely top 5, solid top 5 greatest shows I've seen. It's phenomenal. It's amazing. I love it so much. It is just everything I want from a show. I need more space westerns. Please, somebody make more space westerns. Just inject it straight into my veins. I have been desperate my entire life for space westerns. I have loved Cowboy Bebop. I have loved Firefly. The Expanse has space western themes, which is why I love it so much. And if there were 12 seasons of Cowboy Bebop, I would watch them all, because it's just such a good feeling that you get when watching this show. I just can't describe it any other way than that. It's competently well made. The characters are some of the best in television, let alone anime. And it is just phenomenally well written and well made, and I can't say it any other way. Cowboy Bebop is definitely a strong recommend. moving on from that, we have some other shows and movies. This is pretty much, I think, going forward chronologically or sort of chronologically, my list that I had made and gone through and watched of anime shows. And the first two I started off with were anime movies rather than shows, which was Ghost in the Shell and Akira, or Akira, I don't know how you pronounce it. And Ghost in the Shell is phenomenal. It's an amazing movie. I had rewatched it as like one of the first shows or, animes that I had wanted to get into, and just put it on, having heard so many things about it. It and Akira are both like well talked about in anime. I think if you go to any anime discussion and ask them like, what are some of the greatest or most influential movies, they'll probably say these ones somewhere in the list at least. But the original Ghost in the Shell it's something. It's very weird to go back to like 90s anime or like earlier era anime because it is so different. And the reason I keep talking about Ghost in the Shell and Akira together is because they share a lot of similarities in like the way they were made and sort of the era that they represented in anime. But Ghost in the Shell it's phenomenal. It's very psychological. It has action and it has like this theme and this feeling of cyberpunk that it gives you where you're watching it and you just kind of feel enveloped in like a nanomachine blanket, I guess. But it is very psychological and it is very deep in terms of like the themes that it has. But I think the biggest thing is that, I don't know, I think it's the same problem I had with the Lighthouse, where there's a certain threshold of like psychologicalness that something can have before I don't want to say check out because that's a negative connotation to that, but before like you get the general message of Ghost in the Shell about transhumanism and about like the soul and what it means to be human, and then you just kind of like, you stew with that, but the specific elements that it's throwing at you, I feel like just kind of bounced off of me at some point. And I think that's just a me problem more than it is any fault of Ghost in the Shell, but it is still very, very good. There was just a lot of the 90s anime era, especially with these two movies, I think can be best described with lots of silence. There is more than any show that you'll see nowadays or any movie that you'll see nowadays that's anime, just lots of uses of like long pauses and long breaks that they let the entire moment breathe. And I think as someone who has the attention span of a goldfish, it doesn't connect with me all that well. I think my ADHD just makes me like bring out my phone as soon as like a long pause like Ghost in the Shell has tons of happens. So Ghost in the Shell gets a medium recommendation. Not a strong recommendation. Again, like the Lighthouse or even Dune, I think on a technical level, it's near perfect. It would definitely be like at the top of my list in terms of if this was like a 10 out of 10 score. But in terms of enjoyment, it wasn't quite there. It was a little hard to watch as someone with poor attention. And as well, we have Akira, which is another, I think this movie was made in the 80s more than the 90s. I'm also assuming that Ghost in the Shell was made in the 90s just because it feels very 90s. But Akira was made in the 80s, I want to say. I don't have the exact numbers. I'll probably put them up on screen if I'm being an idiot right now. But Akira is amazing. If you ask anyone about influential anime, this is probably the first thing they'll tell you. This movie is like the most well talked about movie of all time if you are into anime in any capacity, because this movie is like, it's like a love letter to animation. It's really just phenomenally well made, and from a technical aspect, I would say like perfect. It's amazing. It's so fluid and dynamic, but also lived in and real, and just conveys this feeling of like, you know, grungy cyberpunkness that I love. Cyberpunk being, I think, the genre right below space western that's just like my favorite and I need more of, though it has been done way more than space westerns have. And Akira is amazing. I think that this is the first review I would conflate quality in terms of production value with quality in terms of enjoyment, because Akira is a movie that you pretty much nowadays enjoy for its technical components, for like how well made it is. When you're looking at even just a character walking down the street and there's like 17 different layers of animation scrolling past them in the distance, it's like, what the fuck am I watching? This is amazing. And like you can see the passion kind of bleed through it. And from an enjoyment aspect, if this movie was terribly animated or like not that well made, it would be pretty generic and boring, I think. And I don't think anyone would really remember it, because it is a pretty just straightforward, weird plot. But it is the technical aspects that you watch and just go, holy fuck, I can't even begin to like think of how much work this took. And then the story is like, yeah, it's okay. It's an okay story. It's pretty good, I guess. There's some cool characters. There's a psychic baby. That's fine. All right. But oh my god, the animation was fucking fantastic. I think that's sort of the Akira experience. And as such, like Ghost in the Shell, I'm giving it a medium recommendation. And so up next is My Hero Academia, the first in a long line of anime shows that I have decided to watch. And My Hero was not a show that I had put on my list of shows to watch, rather it was one that I was kind of watching in the background. I'd been seeing the show, I think, since season 1 premiered and just kind of watching every couple of episodes. This is the first, I think, official shonen anime that I had gotten into. Before a Naruto or a Hunter x Hunter or anything like that, I had seen My Hero Academia, and it's pretty good. I think everyone is sort of biased towards the first shonen anime that you get into because they are a really good genre, but it is heavily tainted by kind of like, if you watch Naruto as a kid, of course it's going to be your favorite show. And My Hero, I got into late teens, like I was probably already in college by the time I was really watching it. And so to like actually watch it all the way through and kind of speed up the process of watching it this year and finish it and get to like the last season, kind of still be catching up with it now. It's solid. It's all right. It's a good shonen anime. They're pretty good, pretty much. And that's what My Hero Academia is for me. It's a very solid show. I really like it. It's amazing to watch characters fight. It's amazing when Deku punches a guy really hard. I feel, oh, that's really good. My monkey brain goes, oh, this is amazing. But it's not like making me cry or anything. So yeah, that's really, I mean, all I have to say on it, I think. There's not much for me to talk about with shonen anime a lot of the time, just because it is like, it's the Marvel movie of anime. I really like Marvel movies, but none of them are my favorite movies of all time. And I think that's sort of the case with a lot of shonen anime. I would give My Hero Academia the strongest light recommend that I possibly could. However, on the opposite end of the spectrum, I would say is Attack on Titan, which is very shonen in a way, and then very quickly becomes not shonen, because this is a show that right off the bat hits you with like how well thought out it is. And when you watch this show, it's just mind-blowing revelation after mind-blowing revelation. And I had seen, I think, all of season 1 when it had come out, and then when seasons 2 and 3 were airing, I was like iffy on it. And then I saw season 4 was airing, and I said, oh, I need to watch this now, because it's the final season is what they advertised it as. And the first season of it is almost misleading. I don't know. It's very, very good. And I remember watching the first season and going like, oh, this is really cool. Like people fighting giant horror monsters. Like that's kind of cool. But then I got to like season 2 when I had rewatched it, and then it's, oh fuck, this is fantastic. Like this is an art piece. This is amazing. And I don't think there's a show that I have enjoyed the plot of more than Attack on Titan. The characters are great. The animation goes so fucking hard sometimes with like some of the Levi fight scenes. It's actually insane. But the plot of the show just keeps going and keeps twisting out and like tricking you and then revealing stuff that blows your mind. Like it's phenomenal. Attack on Titan to me is just way more than the action scenes of the show. And I think even if the action wasn't in the show, or it was bad or like wasn't put together in the way that it is, that's amazing, I think it would be still like one of the coolest and greatest shows I'd seen. So Attack on Titan to me definitely gets put in a strong recommend. It's just amazing to watch. And the last final half season, whatever the fuck is coming out, and I'm really excited to see how it ends, because this is a show that I feel, if it sticks the ending, is going to be like remembered for a long time as just like an example of storytelling, because it's just so well done. And speaking of bad endings, next up we have Death Note, which is really good for the first half, or first, I would say almost 2/3 actually. But Death Note is phenomenal in every like conceptual way. I love the show. It is obviously culturally a phenomenon, like everyone knows Death Note, and I really enjoyed this show. For the first, I think 24 episodes out of the 30 something that the show goes on for, and I don't want to spoil what happens that made me not like the show, or like the point where I stopped liking this show, because I am trying to keep this relatively spoiler free here for recommendations. But around episode 24, I just did not like the show after that point. I really enjoyed the writing of this show. I think that it is so phenomenally incredible to write characters this smart. Kira and Elle are some of the smartest characters in anime, and just to be able to write them, to be able to think those things, I have no idea how you even do that, how the writer was able to even like conceive of the loopholes and the like 5D chess game that these characters are playing. It is amazing. And the characters themselves are well written, very well done, but you are watching Death Note to see the crazy maneuvers and like psychological tricks and just the insane plays that these characters are making in this essentially just battle of wits. And to anyone who hasn't seen Death Note, I won't spoil what happens around episode, I don't know if it was 24 exactly, I'm just making that number up, but like mid-20s. There was something that happens that if everyone who's watching who has seen Death Note, you'll know immediately what I'm talking about. And after that point, for the last 10 to 15 episodes, or however many are left, I just did not like the show at that point. I think the first 24 episodes are amazing, and if the show had ended there, or had, you know, like that was the climax of the show and it had gone a couple more episodes after that to like conclude what had happened, I think it would have been a phenomenal show. I think I would recommend this show much higher than I'm going to. But the last bit of it and the ending of Death Note is incredibly weak and incredibly almost out of character for a lot of the characters in the show, and very just, it's hard to describe without spoiling it, but it is very weak and very hard to recommend to someone because it does end in a unsatisfying way to me. And I honestly did like, again, the big event that happens around halfway during the show. I did like that's what happened, but I just think that them not ending it there and having it just drag on further, because it does feel like an ending to the show at about episode 24 or whatever, that feels like the ending of the show, and then it just keeps going and there's just more shit and more characters are introduced in like the last 10 episodes, and you're like, what is happening? Like, what's going on? And it just loses all momentum. So I think Death Note for me is definitely a medium recommend, and that's where I am going to put it. It would have been a strong recommend, and this would have been probably one of my favorite animes if it had ended where I had wanted it to, and where like the obvious ending point was. But it doesn't, and so it takes major points off of it. It makes it much harder to recommend because you can't even stop the show at that point, because there is a lot going on after that like changes how you view the show. So it is just kind of ruined by the ending. But again, not ruined, it's a medium recommend. I enjoy the show a lot more than I don't like it. And the first 24 episodes are incredible. It's just, if you're going to watch it, be prepared that the last third of the show is just kind of weak and boring and is a lot less interesting to watch. But a show that is not interesting to watch, that doesn't really work now, does it? Is Evangelion, which is, holy shit, I don't know how to describe this to someone who hasn't seen it, because it's very unique. Evangelion is incredibly unique. And this was one of the earlier animes I had watched, because again, it's recommended heavily. Like, everyone talks about it and how influential it is, because it's an older show and it still goes on today. I mean, the movies that have come out recently are still part of that story. But Evangelion is just, it's phenomenal. I fucking love it. To best describe the show, it's like again, I can't think of other shows that it's like, which is usually what I do when I'm reviewing something, is try to make a comparison. But there's really nothing else like Evangelion. Nothing else has reached the introspection that Evangelion has, and just the pure exploration of the writer's psyche. I mean, again, trying not to spoil anything here, but the last couple of episodes like aren't even episodes of the show. They don't even continue the plot of the show. The show basically stops and it just becomes like a therapy session for the writer, and, you know, if you can relate to them yourself. And I was someone who did relate a lot to the writer, the creator, Hideaki Anno, and who did really just feel for the main character, Shinji, and all of the characters in the show, because it is just this flawed group of people exploring their flaws and almost succumbing to them. And it becomes incredibly depressing but also therapeutic in a way to watch this show, because it's the opposite of what most shows are, I think is the best way to describe it. You watch a normal show, especially a show like Evangelion, it's a mech show. It's teenagers and giant robots fighting aliens. Like, it is, from just an outward perspective, if you watch one of the first couple of episodes with no context, you would think this is Gundam. And in shows like that, or in pretty much any other show, the typical archetype of a main character in one of those shows is that it's escapism. I'm watching Superman fight bad guys because he's an ideal version of who I'd like to be, and I'm seeing myself fight those bad guys. And to see Superman lose is just not something you ever see. To see main characters die in a show, or main characters fail in a show in particular, it's meant to be something bad happening. It's meant to be something that happens before they then succeed and overcome whatever weaknesses they're facing. And the normal plot of a show, the reason you would watch it and relate to it, is because you're seeing yourself in those characters and seeing them overcome their own tribulations. But to watch Evangelion is the opposite. It is to watch characters fail almost exclusively, succumb to their worst desires. And that's something that the show explores that I have never seen before, and the sort of raw emotion that you feel. And to say that this show affected me is an understatement. I think with a lot of shows, and there is a couple on this list, I have cried during the show. I've cried at Attack on Titan. A show coming up that I'll talk about is Steins Gate. I've cried watching a show. Like, you feel emotion watching it, and I'm someone, I don't feel any shame or anything crying at a show. And when I watched Evangelion, it was actually like a different feeling. It's not just, oh, a sad thing or a happy thing is happening that makes me feel emotional because I'm invested in these characters. It's watching a show and then like staring at a wall and like thinking about your own life. And it affected me, and it basically like single-handedly changed my entire opinion of myself and my entire like outlook on life. Like, that's how powerful this show can be. So yeah, I love Evangelion. I wouldn't call it my favorite show of all time, because I think there are shows I've enjoyed more, and I think the purpose of entertainment is to be enjoyable and to be rewatchable, and Evangelion is not a show I want to rewatch anytime soon. In fact, the movies, the rebuild movies, I think they're called, the 1.0, 2.0, the 4 of them have just finished with the last one coming out this year, and I have not touched them, and I do not want to touch them until I am emotionally ready to handle them, because I feel like if I'm not emotionally ready, I'm just going to break down. And so yeah, I don't think Evangelion is necessarily the best made show. And again, the last couple of episodes are maybe the most divisive that they could possibly be. And I have seen End of Evangelion, which does retcon or like retell the ending in a way, but it is still like, if you're watching this show expecting a logical conclusion to the literal plot, don't watch this show. If you're watching the show to try and connect with these characters and like understand emotions and deeper, darker thoughts, that's what it's there for. I would best describe it as like watching a show to give yourself therapy, which of course shouldn't be a replacement for real therapy, or I'm not saying anything like that, but it is just incredibly powerful if you can relate to what the show is trying to tell you. And for that reason alone, and just the state of mind that I was in when I watched it, this show is the strongest recommendations that I can possibly give. It deals with mental illness and depression and anxieties and connecting with people, I think, in a way that no other show has ever replicated, and few other mediums could even replicate in the same way. It's just an experience. I love it so much. And so moving on from Evangelion, we have, I guess, what would be the opposite in terms of what the show is about, which is Gurren Lagann, which I always feel like I'm mispronouncing it because it seems like a German word, but it's Japanese, whatever. Gurren Lagann is, in a literal plot sense, the same as Evangelion. It is also teenagers in robot costumes fighting alien type beings to save the universe, but in a narrative sense and in the sense of the point of the show, it could not be anything further from Evangelion. This show it's hype the show. If you have ever heard anyone talk about anime and how ridiculous it gets, Evangelion is like the literal definition of that. To the point where, not even to spoil anything, but like near the end of the show, they're throwing suns at each other, like fucking galaxies are being punched apart. It's insanity, and it is upbeat, it is uplifting, it is literally like, again, the opposite of Evangelion, where instead of exploring these deep dark thoughts, it's bringing you up in a way that very few shows can. And I just thoroughly enjoyed it. I think that it's not perfect. It definitely has some moments that were a little on the boring side. There's the famous like episode 3 or episode 5, an early episode of the show that's like famously bad, so much so that in another show I'm going to talk about, Kill la Kill, made by the same people, they mock how bad that episode of Gurren Lagann was. And there was points even in the middle of the show that were like a little boring or a little bit like unsatisfying, but to get to the end of this show where it just becomes the most insane shit you ever witnessed in your life is amazing. And it's so uplifting and so, again, the opposite of an Evangelion. I would almost recommend Evangelion and Gurren Lagann like back to back as sort of an example of the lows that you can get into, but then also lifting yourself back up from them. Because especially with the main character of Kamina, who is like, he's like the friend that every person needs. He's just like the perfect person in terms of like raising people's spirits. And you know, like if you can't believe in yourself, believe in the me that believes in you is like so amazingly powerful. And I love it so much. But the show is not, it's not perfect. And even the heights that it does reach emotionally or when talking about like deeper feelings definitely aren't anything close to an Evangelion, because it doesn't try to go that far. It tries to still remain in the realm of an anime show and hyping people up and being entertaining. But as an entertaining show, Gurren Lagann is possibly the most entertaining. If you are someone who talks about like, this character can fight this character and Goku's so cool because he blows up planets, like Gurren Lagann will blow you away. It's not even close to like how insane the show gets. And just for that alone, I would give it a medium recommend. It is honestly phenomenal and I really do enjoy it. It does have faults, but it is just so satisfying to watch people punch each other into fucking galaxies by the end of this show. And it is really well done. The characters are great as well. And speaking of characters, we have what I would call my favorite. I think it's safe to say this is my favorite. I think other shows are better made or I've connected with more or technically are better. But I think my favorite anime, if someone were to ask me what my favorite is Steins Gate. And now I talked about before with Evangelion how emotional I got. Like that was by the end couple of episodes, and especially watching the movie, I was crying, I was tearing up, I was a wreck emotionally. And the tears that I were crying at Evangelion were introspective. They were very much like exploring the darkness of my own mind through the show. The tears that I've cried at Steins Gate, it's like watching the best made soap opera that you've ever seen, and you're just crying and you're just tearing up at every like emotional bit. This is definitely the show that I've cried the most at, surprisingly, even compared to an Evangelion. And it's just phenomenal. The characters in this show are some of the best ever written to me. And it takes its sweet time to explore them, which I really do love. The thing about Steins Gate is it's, I believe, 24 episodes, the standard 24, if not something close to that. And the first 12 are just set up. They're just exploring these characters. They are just building up their relationships with each other. I mean, like half of the show is just these characters like hanging out and kind of building up to the plot. And you really, really get invested to them to when episode 12 hits and you cry for 12 episodes straight. Because it is so emotional and such an exploration of these characters. And also it's cool sci-fi shit, which I love. I love any smart sci-fi time travel stories and like how they explore it. And Steins Gate is a time travel story. It is phenomenally well done. I think I brought it up briefly in my Cowboy Bebop video, but the musical score in Steins Gate is like the hypest shit ever. And now there's a couple of shows on here that I haven't finished. Like Evangelion, I talked about how I haven't finished the movies. And with Ghost in the Shell, I have seen the movie, but I haven't seen the show or the shows that have come after it. Steins Gate, I have not seen Steins Gate 0, and that might affect my review of the entire show because I've heard that it's different in terms of quality. And I do want to get around to it so that hopefully by next year's end of year review, I can cover Steins Gate 0. But I have just seen the original Steins Gate, and it is phenomenal. My favorite show of all time. And so Steins Gate gets a very strong recommend. It's just so well written and the characters are just phenomenal. And I highly recommend that everyone watches it. And following the great back-to-back that is Evangelion and Steins Gate, we now come to Mob Psycho 100. And Mob Psycho 100, if you don't know, is made by the same people, the same original manga author as One Punch Man. And I believe the same animation studio as season 1 of One Punch Man, but I could be wrong on that. And following One Punch Man, it is an anti-shonen. The main character of Mob Psycho 100, just like the main character of One Punch Man, is the most powerful being in the universe, essentially. And it's almost a comedy as to how it builds up like a regular shonen like Dragon Ball would, but then they just immediately win, or they rise above. But I think what Mob Psycho does that One Punch Man doesn't, and I didn't include One Punch Man in my review here because I originally saw season 1 like whenever that came out, and I haven't even seen season 2 because I've heard it's terrible. But what Mob Psycho does that One Punch Man, even the best parts of One Punch Man don't, to me, is that it has an emotional core to it that is just so good. It's so like perfectly encapsulated in all of like the cynical sort of like funny bits that the show throws at you and the goofiness of the show. It has that emotional nugget that's just like so good to dive into. And the exploration of the kind of dynamic between Mob and, I think his name is pronounced Regan, I don't actually know. But between Mob and his mentor is just phenomenal. Really well done, with this kind of beautiful layer of like action epicness and just absurd comedy and like really weird visuals sometimes. It's amazing and a really, really good show. And I would highly recommend it because it is one of the few shows that, again, I watched this after One Punch Man, or not immediately after, but because of One Punch Man. And One Punch Man always to me felt hollow. It felt like a little weak in terms of any characters or anything, because One Punch Man isn't a real character and his friends and like the gang of characters around him aren't really real characters. And so Mob Psycho going into it, I was like, oh, well, I'm not really going to relate to this character if he can just win every fight. But then it explores his character in a way that's really, really good and is surprising and gets even better in the second season. So I would give Mob Psycho a medium recommend. Again, not perfect. It didn't really like emotionally connect with me that hard, but it is just intensely enjoyable. And that's really all a show needs to be. But it's not, you know, like the best show of all time, but it also doesn't need to be. And kind of going further on that topic of enjoying a show, but knowing that it's not going to be the best thing ever, I have my next show, which is Haikyu. And Haikyu is possibly the simplest plot of any show to explain that I've covered so far. It is teen boys playing volleyball. And that's it. That's the whole show. You can go home now. Haikyu is a sports anime, and I think the only sports anime I've seen, and maybe the only one I might see, because the genre as a whole doesn't seem super enticing to me, just because, again, of like how little emotional connection you have and how little like there's not much of a threat. There's not much of like a meaning to it. Like, oh, they won the volleyball tournament. Cool. I don't see how that like changes much about what I think of the characters. But Haikyu is really well done. It has really, really well written characters, which I think really saves the show when it is very low stakes and very low intensity a lot of the time, where the show will be incredibly intense about a volleyball match, but then if you think about it for even 1 second, you go like, oh, okay, like that's not, I don't really care that much about if they lose this volleyball game. And so I think that's just like, it just kind of goes to show how important characters are in a show, because if the characters in Haikyu were not super strong and I didn't care about them, this show would just be meaningless to me. It just wouldn't be that enjoyable, just because, again, like I don't really care about volleyball. It's really amazing that they're able to kind of pull off where you're actually invested in any amount in this show. And I think just kind of goes to the strength of the writing and the character building that the show does. And so I put it in a light recommend. And moving on from the boys volleyball show, we have the show, I was going to say for girls, but it's really not at all, to the point where it feels weird recommending the show and talking about it. Kill la Kill, which if you didn't know was a show made by the same people as Gurren Lagann. But it is, again, just this intense sort of like over the top show. Studio Trigger really knows how to like just be insane and get away with it and make you actually relate to insane stuff that's happening. And Kill la Kill, in sort of the way that Gurren Lagann overhyped this intense action stuff, overhypes weird sex stuff. Kill la Kill is probably the most interesting exploration of fan service that I have ever seen in an anime show. And I don't know if there's any other shows like it that do this, but it is almost singularly focused on how sexualized anime characters can become, and has made an entire show to like poke fun of that fact. Because if you didn't know, if you haven't seen Kill la Kill, the main character gets their powers. Everyone in this universe gets their powers, but the main character specifically gets their powers from losing clothing. Clothing is sort of the bad guy in the show, and the less clothing that you have on you, the more powerful you become. And the more scantily clad you are, the like better of a fighter you are. And on a surface level, that sounds really weird and kind of scummy and like it was written by a 13-year-old boy. But like on a deeper level, it's a parody of itself. It just completely goes off the rails almost instantly. It just becomes insane in a way that Gurren Lagann was still grounded by some sense of reality, and these characters were doing extraordinary things by the end. But the characters at the beginning of the show just felt like real people in their own situation. Kill la Kill is like if every single character was like a SpongeBob or like a Rick and Morty or like a Bugs Bunny, where they're all just cartoon characters doing outlandish shit who are complete caricatures of themselves. And even the main character is like a caricature of a main character, where she's coming up with cool one-liners and like doing shit. And it's just really fun to watch. And it's a show that, again, is really hard to recommend, especially to someone who hasn't seen anime before, because you would just look at it and go like, oh, you're a pervert. Oh, okay, anime is for perverts. But I think watching it with any sort of like knowledge on anime or any sort of backstory on like fan service in the industry and stuff like that makes it almost immediately apparent that like they knew all along, and they were making this to poke fun at that and to sort of make a show that goes so far that it wraps around and you understand and think like, oh, they're not actually like perverts making this show. And the show, just on a level outside of all of the meta elements and the wacky craziness, is well written. It's well made. Action scenes are great, well animated, and very, very enjoyable. Just very hard to recommend to someone. It's a show that, unless it's a friend who already knows about anime and is like a weird pervert like yourself, it's very hard to get them into it. But overall, I would give Kill la Kill a medium recommend, because I think it's just very, very enjoyable. Even if all of this weird stuff aside, it is a very enjoyable show. And next on the list is a show that's almost the opposite of Kill la Kill in terms of like the fan serviceness in the writing, which is Jujutsu Kaisen. And Jujutsu Kaisen, I think I can confidently say, even though I haven't seen that many shonen anime, that it is my favorite, and it is probably the best by far to me. I love this show. It is a clear distillation of the formula of shows like Naruto, One Piece, etc., to the point where the main cast of Jujutsu Kaisen can be directly compared to the main cast of Naruto, pretty much one for one directly. Except what Jujutsu Kaisen does that no other shonen anime that I have seen does is it perfects this formula. You know, you look at a show like My Hero Academia, which was made after Naruto, One Piece, Bleach, all of these shows were popular, and had time to look at these shows that were made before it and to improve on it. And My Hero Academia feels like it doesn't. It feels like it just does more of the same. There's still that weird sexism and that weird sexualization sometimes. There's still sort of that weird sense that like every fight's gonna end with the main character getting a power-up and saving the day, and like these guys are the good guys and the good guys always win. But with Jujutsu Kaisen, what it does that's amazing is it takes all of that stuff and it does not try to change it at all, but instead perfects it. It instead takes all of it and thinks, what's the best part of this? What's this element of the show? What are we looking at here, and how can we make it better? Just as a simple example, I think Jojo, being my favorite character in anime, he's just fucking fantastic, is an amazing example of this. Because you look at a character like Kakashi from Naruto, or I mean, the only other real comparison I would have from my own experience is My Hero Academia, so All Might from that. The mentor character, they're in literally every single anime. The character that mentors the main character and is supposed to be this like incredibly powerful person that the main character is supposed to surpass at some point. And you look at those mentor characters, and Gojo is just the distillation of them, where he's meant to be so insanely powerful that I legitimately don't think there's another anime character that could beat him in a fight, because they just make him like, oh, he's OP. His superpower is infinity. He can do fucking anything. And he's just incredibly written as like this fun-having, blasé, nonchalant person who is this distillation of like pure power in this universe, which is just a perfection of that formula. And I think Jujutsu Kaisen does this in every way. Even if you look at the fan service, the female characters in the show are incredibly strong and very well written, just like the male characters are, and just treated as people. They're not treated as like the weird sex objects that they often are in My Hero Academia or Naruto, where this female character exists to be the main character's love interest. Like, no, they're their own people with their own problems. And on top of that, it being animated by Mappa, the animation and the fight scenes in this show are fucking phenomenal. I have not even found other shows that I can rewatch the fight scenes as much as I can with Jujutsu Kaisen. Even Attack on Titan, because Attack on Titan sparsely uses those amazingly epic moments. Jujutsu Kaisen just fills the entire show with them, where even normal fight scenes are just amazingly animated. And so I would say that Jujutsu Kaisen doesn't exceed beyond the shonen anime archetype. It doesn't try to do anything new. It just takes every element and improves it to the point where it is my favorite shonen anime and is just the best of the bunch whenever I look at them all as a whole. It's just phenomenal, and I think more people need to watch it because it is just the best shonen anime to me. And because of that, I'm giving it a medium recommend. Again, it's not perfect. Doesn't do much that like affected me. Doesn't do much that is exceeding beyond in the art form, but it is just this perfect culmination of everything that I just can't stop watching. And next up we have Code Geass, which is something that I watched immediately after Death Note. I do want to mention I did change the order around a little bit, and I had heard a lot about Code Geass. A lot of people had told me about it and how amazing it is, especially the ending. I think is maybe the most hyped endings in any anime show community I've ever seen. And so I started watching it, and it was really not fun to get through a lot of the time. Like, I don't know what it was, but the hype over the show, I would have thought that this show was like amazing through and through, and like Lelouch was pulling off these Kira level stunts and amazing 5D chess moves. And instead it was really boring a lot of the time. And that's what I remember from this show. There are really cool moments and really great moments that happen a lot of the time, but a lot of the show is boring school stuff, which I'm not a fan of. And I think the relationship between Lelouch and Subaru, or whatever his name was, is really, really cool. And I think it's a unique concept for a show, especially in the way that like the weird government thing where like Britain has invaded and taken over the world somehow. I think it's really cool. But the show itself was very boring a lot of the time and not that enjoyable. And overall, the show was just pretty meh. The animation also wasn't that great. I don't like the big eye anime look. I think another show I've been recommended is Clanad that I really want to watch, but I look at the cover art for that show and I don't want to watch it because it looks fucking awful. And overall, Code Geass was just kind of a disappointment for me when I watched it. It was not that great. And then I got to the ending, and the ending of Code Geass is the best ending an anime has ever had. It is fucking amazing. I love the Evangelion ending, which I know a lot of people hate because what it does, and that was formerly the best ending I'd seen. And it's an ending that hits you emotionally, not with a literal plot recap. Like, there's no conclusion to the plot of Evangelion. But with Code Geass, I think it concludes the plot perfectly, to the point where the entire show seems to have been planned around the ending. And so the ending is just phenomenal. It's so well done. And it retroactively makes the show better. To have watched it and see all of the parts moving towards this ending is just so good and so well done. But the show itself is very boring. And I would say there's like half the show is not filler because it does move the plot forward, but intensely unenjoyable for me because it's very boring. And it tries to be like weirdly slice of life at some points, and I just don't like it. I think if you cut all of the school parts out of this show, it would be a lot smoother of a watch. But then there is still parts of the show that aren't the school parts that are still kind of boring. And even a lot of the, like, I don't think any of the fight scenes were really that amazing to me. Like, they talk about, oh, this robot can beat this robot, and this is the new best mech out there, but now we have the new best mech, and Lancelot is the best mech now. But really, I just watched them fight, and I was like, not that entertained. I was trying to more engage with the plot, and the plot was probably the best part, because at some points, Lelouch does pull off these really smart moves, and there are these really cool plot points in the show, especially with the, how do I say this without spoiling it? The princess and the sort of twist that happens with her. But yeah, there is just a lot of this show that was like really meh to me. But the ending is fantastic. The overall plot, I think if you were to explain it to someone, would sound really, really cool. And if you were to strip out all of the boring parts, would be really, really good. But there is just a lot kind of dragging the show down for me, which was really disappointing because I really thought I would like it more than I like Death Note, and it just was not the case. But I would still give this show a light recommend, because I think you should watch it. I think it is a show that you should watch almost for the cultural impact and to understand the ending and talk about it more than anything. But just genuinely enjoying the show, I think it is good. I think there's just a lot of parts of the show that I would want to skip and that I would want to cut out if I had editing control over this show, which is kind of unfortunate because I did really expect the show to be a lot better than it was. And a show that is... well, a show that I think has earned its reputation, honestly, to say the least, is Redo of Healer, which was the first ever show that I've ever covered on this channel with the most clickbait title that you could possibly make. And well, dislikes are disabled now on videos, but that video got me a lot of hate in the dislike section because of that clickbait title and sort of my stance on the show that it wasn't as bad as people were calling it. And I still believe that. I still don't believe Redo of Healer is like the worst show ever made, or that it's entirely unjustifiable or entirely just evil as people have called it. But what it is not good. I think I don't remember too much of what I had said about the show in my video because that was like a year ago at this point. But what I remember doing in my defense of it was compare it to the plots of hentai. And that is the best possible way I can explain the quality of the plot of the show, is that it is a good plot for a hentai. For a regular show, it is not that great of a plot, and it is not that complex or deep, and you hate all of the characters, and there's not really that many redeeming qualities unless you're a sadist. So yeah, but it's not terrible. It's not the worst show ever, but would I recommend Redo of Healer to anyone? Fuck no, not at all. Never in a million years. So Redo of Healer can find its way with Space Jam in the rejection pile. Don't watch it unless you're a weird pervert, and then you've probably already seen it because there's not a lot of shows made for weird perverts nowadays. Wonder why. And moving on from possibly the worst show I'd covered on my list just for a variety of reasons, we now move on to Demon Slayer. And now I have talked about shonen anime and sort of the meh feeling that I get towards a lot of them. And I would talk about how Jujutsu Kaisen has kind of perfected it in my mind. It's kind of one of the best ones out there for a lot of reasons. But Demon Slayer, I think, it's sort of perfected it in the opposite way, where it just goes full on, head on, straight into the shonen tropes, and it fills them out very, very well in a way that's very enjoyable. Where the main character is the most boring plank of wood you've ever seen in your life because he is just a trope. He's just, I'm the main character of the show, and the side cast is all enjoyable in their own tropey ways. You know, the villain Michael Jackson is just the embodiment of pure evil with seemingly no redeeming qualities. And I don't know if the show ever is going to explore more of that, but it's overall kind of meh in the story department. But what Demon Slayer does amazingly, and the reason I think that it has become such a cultural phenomenon and so popular that the movie now has, I think, become the #1 selling movie in all of Japan, maybe, or at least the #1 anime movie, I think. And the reason for that is that it is incredibly well made. the show knows that you're there for the fight scenes, and it knows that you're there for the epic action. And so it gives it to you in spades, and it's all beautifully animated and amazingly well done. And that's all it really needed. And that's what the show knows you're there for. It's what the show is catering towards, is the person who wants to see cool ass sword fights between demons and demon slayers. It's just pure dopamine in a show. And that's really the only review that I could possibly give it. So this show, I think, is definitely in a light recommend, like a lot of the shonen anime that I've recommended, but it is intensely enjoyable as like a popcorn show. And there's really no segue I can give into the next show. I've talked about Redo of Healer being a bad show, and the show that I covered immediately after Redo of Healer and how clickbaited that title was X-Arm, and how I don't even know how to describe X-Arm, because it's sort of the Room of anime. It is that so bad it's good show. It's terrible on any sort of competency level. It's I believe Crunchyroll original anime, and it is just awfully made. The writing of the show doesn't make any sense. The characters just don't even exist. They're not even characters. They're just voice actors over animated husks. The animation is the worst that you'd possibly find, to the point where I've seen like fan animations on YouTube that look better than this. And everything about the show is just not well done. And in a way, it almost elevates it to then become enjoyable because of this. Because if you're watching the show and you have any sort of experience with animation or any sort of experience with how these shows are made or any sort of appreciation for that art, in the same way that Akira is very enjoyable because you can appreciate it, X-Arm is enjoyable because you can laugh at it. Because the show is just so poorly made that it's laughable. It's insane. And every moment that you watch the show, you like question the sanity of the creators, where it just becomes this like weird game of like, are they making this or is this like an elaborate shitpost? Because I can't tell sometimes. And that's really all I can say about it, is that it does feel like a shitpost. It feels like it was entirely made ironically as like an example of a bad anime show. And while this is enjoyable then on a scale of like, you know, so bad it's good, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it because the enjoyment wears off really fast, to the point where I made my video on it and I only covered the first episode. And it was so funny to me in that first episode. And then I started to watch the second episode and just shut it off. Like I couldn't even get through it, because I had originally planned to make more videos on it on the later episodes of the show, but I could not bring myself to watch it because so quickly did it go from, oh, this is really funny that they're doing this, to this is just really bad. This is just really boring and not fun. And yeah, you'd laugh at the bad animation, but the bad animation is like so even throughout that you just get used to it, and then it just becomes unenjoyable. So I think that X-Arm very strongly goes on the rejection pile, even though it does somehow break out of it in a way that I think you would need to watch at least a compilation video on YouTube of like the funniest moments of it. But the entire show as a whole, I just cannot in any good spirits give a recommendation in any conceivable way, because it is just bad. And so, getting out of the hole of terrible shows, we move to a show that I am incredibly conflicted on, and that is Wonder Egg Priority. Now this show, I started watching, I want to say around episode 3, maybe 4 or 5. I started watching pretty early on while it was airing because I had heard such amazing things about it. People were making YouTube videos on why it was so good. People were just talking about it relentlessly about how amazing it was. And so I started watching the show. And I was immediately hooked on it. For those of you who don't know about Wonder Egg Priority, which I imagine is going to be quite a few people because this show was like seriously underrated even when it was coming out and in like the height of people complimenting it. It is a show that is essentially, I would say, similar to Evangelion in that it is on the surface level a pretty generic-ish type of plot, but it deals with heavier themes very consistently. Though unlike Evangelion, it is more direct about what its themes are and what it's talking about. And what it is talking about is mental health and suicide. And it is very explicitly handling those issues. And it is this sort of adventurous, kind of lighthearted show that gets incredibly dark a lot of the time and is almost a message on positivity through the darkness. And starting it at like episode 1, you're immediately hooked on it. It's incredibly well made, incredibly well animated, and is a show that while I was watching it, and I was watching the show weekly, every Wednesday I remember it was coming out, I was thinking this is one of the best shows I've ever seen. This is up there with an Evangelion, this is up there with a Steins Gate, up there with so many shows that I had seen and loved immediately. And I was watching this show going, there's no way that this isn't like the best show ever, and I cannot wait to see how it ends. And then I saw how it ended, and it was not good. The ending of Wonder Egg Priority, I think, more so even than a Death Note or any number of shows that have bad endings that are good shows up until the ending. You can compare it to things like Game of Thrones, whatever. The bad thing about Wonder Egg Priority is just how unsatisfying it is intending to be. The intention of an ending of Death Note is intending to be supremely satisfying, because by any literal sense of the plot, it is completely done. It has dealt with all of the characters. Like, this is the end of the show. You don't need to watch anymore. And the ending of even a show like Game of Thrones, which has a notoriously bad ending, has a literal end to the plot that if you like the direction they're taking the show, you should theoretically enjoy. But the ending of Wonder Egg Priority is so much worse than those to me, because it seemed like they didn't want to end it. It is a show that builds up so many of these little mysteries and these little points where throughout the entire show, there's this feeling that at any moment they're going to reveal to you that the entire thing has been fake and here's what's really going on. And then it never quite does. I mean, it does in a literal sense. There is a moment, episode 9 or 10, I think, when they completely kind of reveal everything going on, but it feels like they're lying to you. And then that's just the literal ending. That's just the literal like revelation of what's happening. And it feels unsatisfying because it feels like the themes that the show has been tackling up until that point are just null and void in a way that it tackles all of these, again, dark themes like suicide. And then at the end tells you like, oh, here's the reason. Here's the person that's been causing these people to kill themselves. And you just go like, what? It would be like if at the end of Evangelion it goes, oh, Shinji, you have depression. You're a depressed character. But it turns out that the angels have an aura around them that magically makes everyone depressed. And if you kill the final boss, then you'll cure your depression. And that just completely removes any sort of emotional connection that you have to it, because it's no longer about any real emotion, but like this fake villainous character that can be blamed for these things that in real life obviously don't exist. And then the show has the balls to end without tackling any of that. They do not fight the final villain. They do not save the day in the end. They do not fail at all. And then you never see a fight with the final villain. You never see any sort of conclusion to the plot. And the ending of the show feels like a lead into a season 2. Which is funny because the ending of the show, I believe, aired 12 episodes total, but one of the episodes was a recap episode because they had run out of time to finish the episode. So everything got moved forward one episode, and so they had to then, after the initial 12 episode release a special episode that was actually the final episode because they had ended up getting behind. And so I remember people waiting, I think it was like 3 months for this special episode to come out after the initial episodes. And you're told like, oh, this is an hour-long episode and it's going to resolve everything. And the first 20 minutes of it are recap. And then you're getting increasingly worried as you're watching this final episode that it's not going to conclude anything. And then it doesn't. And even the special episode, which is meant to be this show's end of Evangelion, I remember everyone joking, end of Evangelion when it came out, it just doesn't conclude anything. And it just continues to like push forward this growing threat and say like, we didn't really need to fight the threat because it was the friends we made along the way. And then that's it. That's the ending. And it's incredibly unsatisfying. And if this show was a show that was going to get a season 2, which doesn't seem likely, but I could always be proven wrong, then I would rate this show as a very strong recommend, as a very strong show, because it's amazingly profound in how it touches the people that watch it. And I found it amazingly relatable and profound to myself. But when it doesn't resolve the plot, I cannot enjoy the show, because it retroactively makes the rest of the show seem nebulous. It's like a show that gets canceled right before its last episode, except instead of getting canceled, it seems like they had initially intended it to end this way, which makes it much worse. So if this show, Wonder Egg Priority, ever gets a season 2, which I don't think it will, but I really hope it does, I would absolutely love to change this review. But as of right now, I cannot give it anything other than a no opinion, because I can't recommend it to anyone. I cannot recommend you this show when it doesn't end and it doesn't feel satisfying in its ending. Everything leading up to that is fine, but there's nothing to conclude it, you know? It's a build-up and a build-up and more mysteries and cool animation and cool fight scenes and interesting characters, and then it just stops. And so moving on from my incredibly conflicted feelings about Wonder Egg Priority, we now have ReZero, which I don't think I feel conflicted at all about because I really like this show. ReZero was one I had heard a lot about, and it is in the isekai genre of someone from our world getting hit by a truck or something and then waking up in a fantastical world and kind of becoming powerful there or living out some sort of fantasy. And when I had heard about that genre, I was really uninterested in it, and I really just didn't think that it was interesting to me, because just the idea that, oh, I died or whatever in the real world, and now I'm this fantastical person in this RPG world, and I get all of these really hot fantasy chicks, and I'm super powerful and become king, is like just not an interesting premise to me. Just didn't seem that fun. I'm not someone who likes fantasy or especially wish fulfillment type of shows without anything further to them. Like, I've never been a huge power fantasy person unless there's something else to go with that power fantasy, or there's something else to go with the fantasy of getting all of these girls or something like that. And so when I watched ReZero, it was kind of my first introduction to the isekai genre, and so I was kind of introduced to all of the good things about that, the highlights of the isekai genre, as well as the fantastic writing of this show. Oh my god. Because if you don't know, and I think I do need to explain this because it really helps to understand how good the plot is. Essentially, ReZero is an isekai story. Our main character, Subaru, which is literally his name, which is a little weird, wakes up in a fantastical world after being, I think, hit by a truck or some cliche. And he wakes up in this world, and it's a fantasy RPG type world, swords and sorcery. And he has literally no powers whatsoever. He cannot level up. He cannot really learn that much magic. He's really not good at anything, but he does have the power that whenever he dies, the world resets and he comes back to life again from some sort of like save point. And so it becomes this really interesting exploration of someone who's completely powerless in this world, who when he dies, the world resets and he can try again, and he can essentially time travel and go back and redo a conversation with someone to get a better result, or redo a sword fight with someone and actually win because he's done it before, which is a really cool concept on its own and would work in even a generic isekai fantasy. But they explore this sort of idea and this sort of really amazing premise, and then explore the deeper psychological or the deeper emotional parts of that from the starting point of this amazing premise. So not only does it explore like, oh, what would you do if you had the ability to kind of reset and time travel like that? Well, you would win all of these fights and you would talk to all these people and get to know them because you already have talked to them and can kind of game the conversation. But then it understands and goes even deeper into that when it talks about, well, he feels every time he dies, right? So like, how broken can this man become if he just dies over and over again, and that's his only ability in this world? And then it explores relationships with people where he can remember everything that they've done, but then he might die and reset, and now they don't remember a single thing about him. And it explores these amazing issues that I can only describe as amazing because the writing of it is so good and is so well thought out to where everything seems to be planned ahead. And it seems like someone who genuinely took a lot of time to think about these ideas and the implications that they would have and interesting things to do with them in a way that very few shows do. Very few shows utilize their premise in a way that ReZero does. And that's what makes it so good to me. It has great characters, there's good action in it, there is interesting storylines and cool things that happen, but really it's just this exploration of this amazing premise and this amazingly tight-knit story that gets very dark sometimes and incredibly emotional sometimes by dealing with these premises. And I think that alone just makes the show amazing to me. And it is a show that I think if you're getting into anime, I think you need to watch, or I would definitely recommend to you as one of the first animes to watch. Even if you've seen a lot of anime, I think this can greatly add to the experience you've had watching anime as a whole. So I would honestly put Re:Zero as a very strong recommend. It's just very well done. And I am very excited to see where it goes because I think it's still running and I don't know when the next season might come out, but I'm very excited for it. And well, speaking of shows that have possible cliffhangers because they're not finished, we have No Game, No Life, which is a show I had been recommended almost solely on the fact that it had been canceled and had not had a second season in the works. And so I started this show knowing this and understanding, oh, this show doesn't have a second season. I should know that it doesn't end satisfyingly. And then I watched all of the first season anyway and got really, really upset when I found out that it didn't have a second season, even though I already knew this. I finished the last episode of the first season and went, I really want to watch more of this. And I joined the increasingly larger collective fan base of No Game, No Life that is disappointed that there is no second season yet, because this show is really good. And if you want to talk about premises being dealt with really, really well, No Game, No Life does that phenomenally, just as phenomenally as Re:Zero does, in a way where, yeah, this person, the writer really understands exactly what's going on and exactly not only of the premise of the show, but of anime as a whole. And it's really well done and really amazing to watch a lot of the time. The premise being very, very simple, which is that these characters essentially get isekai'd into a world where everything is determined by gaming. So you can literally make a bet with someone, you know, $5 that I'll win this game of rock, paper, scissors. And if you win, the world abides by this and gives you the $5, like by law of the world. It's an entire world run by gaming. And the show explores this amazing premise by having the main characters be the best video game players and the best gamers of any card game, board game, whatever, in the world. And so the exploration of the plot comes from the main characters, who I forget the names of, being essentially the L or the Kira or the Lelouch or the whatever of games, and just completely demolishing everyone and coming up with strategies for games that you had never even thought of. And it just becomes really, really enjoyable to watch them succeed and just beat everyone at everything at all times. And it's really well done, and it's really, really well handled, and it doesn't explore anything deeper than that, really. There's no real emotional connection that you feel, and the show does feel semi-sarcastic a lot of the time with how it deals with everything. And the part of the show that then becomes hard to recommend for me is the incredibly weird relationship between the main characters. So I've talked about Redo of Healer, I've talked about Kill la Kill, and sort of the difference between them, I guess, is that, you know, Redo of Healer being incredibly honest about the fact that it is about sadistic pervert shit, and Kill la Kill is an exploration of the pervert fan service side of anime that does it in a way that makes you understand that they're not actively engaging in that community. And the part of No Game, No Life that I struggle to pack away in my mind is which side of the fence it's on. Especially I believe the last episode or second to last episode, they're playing some game where you shoot people's underwear off, which is I believe a reference to Galgun, which is an actual video game that you're supposed to do this in, where you shoot girls' underwear off to like make them come or whatever. But they're playing this video game as like one of the final video games that you're supposed to play to like win a kingdom or whatever. I'm not going to explain how they get there, but they get to this final game, and the way in which they win is the 19-year-old brother shoots the panties off of his 11-year-old sister, and I have no idea what to think of it. Because on one hand, it is being sarcastic, it's at least being meta about the fact that they're doing this, but they are still genuinely doing it. And it just feels a little uncomfortable. And I'm someone who's very okay with fan service and very okay with explorations of that. I loved Kill la Kill, even Redo of Healer I've defended a lot, but it just feels a little weird in this show. And it's not something that's going to ruin your enjoyment of the show, and it's not something that's going to severely even impact your enjoyment of the show or like how you view the show. I just think it's important to bring up because it's one of the few shows that I can't decide on if I like or don't like that part of it. But other than that, it is an incredibly well-made show. The animation is something that I have not seen before, which is where the outlines of characters, instead of being black lines, are done with this like deep red that makes it feel like this like burnt out sort of, I don't even know how to describe it. It makes your eyes hurt when you watch it late at night. Let's just say that. It's very vibrant, very well animated, and it's just a good exploration of a premise. And sadly, it has only one season and I believe a movie, though the movie is a prequel. And that's it. And that's really all I can say about it. I would honestly, though, give this show a solidly light recommend. Very fun show to watch, and only one season. So if you're okay with it being an unsatisfying conclusion, then it's fun to watch. I'm moving on to Mirai Nikki, which I believe is The Future Diary. And Mirai Nikki is a very interesting show. I had initially been recommended this for probably the worst reason I could have, which is that the main character is a yandere. And I remember I was talking to a friend of mine who really likes anime, and I was talking to them about just some random shit, and we ended up on the conversation of yanderes, who, if you don't know, is this sort of archetype in anime where the girl is so in love with the guy that she would kill anyone, including sometimes the guy, in order to be with him. It's this sort of like demented serial killer love interest trope. And we were talking about it, and they were telling me like, you know, I really don't like people that are into yandere stuff. And I'm like, I'm kind of into it. Like, seems fun, seems like a fun idea. I hadn't seen like too many, if any, shows that had a yandere type. I think the only other example I can think of off the top of my head is My Hero Academia, which had Toga, I think is her name. And I'm like, I like her character. She's fun. She's all right. Like, she's a pretty cool character. And they're like, oh, well, you haven't seen X other shows, and they listed a bunch of shows that had yandere characters, and I'm like, oh well, I need to watch one of these to see what they're talking about. And the show that they had first recommended to me was Mirai Nikki, The Future Diary, which I guess now, spoilers to you, has a very big yandere character in it, and I would say the entire plot of the show revolves around this yandere character. Because the general premise is that the main character finds a cell phone that can predict the future, and essentially them and like 12 other people or 11 other people have these cell phones that can all predict the future, and they have to use these cell phones to kill each other, and the last one standing sort of becomes God, or like wins this game. And the main character is helped by a girl who is deeply in love with him, who is this yandere sort of character. And so I was watching the entire show with this in mind, with this sort of idea that it's the yandere show. And that it's sort of like, okay, otherwise, but that's the part that you're really watching it for. And so watching the show, it was, I don't know, a little weird. I couldn't make my mind up a lot of the time about the show, because I think this is one of the first shows that I had seen on my entire list of shows that I wanted to get through that wasn't a show I had explicitly heard good things about. Because this whole list, aside from the beginning movies and television shows, is about shows that I had wanted to watch and now am getting around to, which is why so many of these shows are ranked so high. The entire list is stacked in the favor of a lot of these shows. And it's because, yeah, I'm going through all of these shows that are like listed as like some of the best animes of all time. So of course all of them are going to rank pretty highly. But then I get around to Mirai Nikki, and it's not a show that a lot of people talk about, and not a show that people bring up as like the best anime of all time in any category, really. I'm sure there are fans of this show, but it is still treated as like the yandere show, or like kind of a mediocre show. And so watching it, I was just a little interested and confused as to exactly what I liked about it and what I didn't. Because Mirai Nikki is not perfect. I would dare say it's not that great. The plot sort of follows a fairly straightforward path, and there's not a huge major twist or turn really at all a lot of the time. And even the ending, which I would say is probably the biggest twist and the biggest sort of like meta moment of the show, never really gets to any point where I'm like, whoa, they did that? But overall, I enjoyed it, and I think it stood out on its own as a good show. But it was just flawed and sort of not terribly interesting a lot of the time. The yandere aspect I kind of liked. I was like, all right, Yuna Gasai is a good character. I don't know, very interesting character. But this show I would give in total a light recommend, and it's pretty good. Solidly pretty good. And so moving on, my next show on the list is Psycho Pass, which is, I think, the only show, or one of the only shows on the list that I actually, other than Redo of Healer and X-Arm, which I just did not like whatsoever, is one of the only shows that I haven't finished. I have seen all of season 1 of Psycho Pass, but I have not seen any of the other seasons. And In a way, I don't think I need to, because the season, and as far as what I've heard, the seasons are very self-contained in their story, and the ending of season 1 felt like an ending to the show, or at least it could have been. But I am fully disclaiming that I am only reviewing the season 1 of Psycho Pass, because I have not seen the other seasons, and I have no intention to, because I really like season 1, but like anything else I felt like they would do with these characters and the plot of the show, I felt was like, I don't know, it didn't feel like it would add to my enjoyment too much. I might be wrong on that, but I didn't feel like I would really want a season 2 or 3. But season 1 of Psycho Pass was really, really good. I think I mentioned in my Cowboy Bebop review that if there was any show that I would want to see in live action, Psycho Pass is the top of my list, because it is very grounded and real, and sort of, I can easily see a live action version of it being made. Do I want one necessarily? Probably not. And I only say that because all of the live action shows that we've seen being made are like by a Netflix or an Amazon or all of these big companies that I don't really want to see a show from, because they don't end up good. But Psycho Pass, the show, is very good. I really like detective shows. I really like, especially cyberpunk, so combining the two was amazing to me. And I think it was a really good exploration of the genre. I've heard a lot about movies like Minority Report that are sort of these thought crime exploring shows, but I had never actually seen anything like that. And then watching Psycho Pass, I'm like, oh, this is a good concept, this is a good execution of the concept, and the characters are really well done. And that's really all I'd wanted to see from something like that. And there's not a lot else going on with it. There's not a lot else that is really being explored with Psycho Pass. Not a lot too much deeper than just the exploration of this cyberpunk society that has almost a Orwellian authoritarian feel to it, and an exploration of the premise and the concept that, oh, what if there was this weird sci-fi thing that could read if you were going to be a criminal and then arrest you before you did a crime. Like, that's really cool. That's really interesting. Really enjoyed seeing that. And the first season, I felt like completely delivered on any expectations I had or anything I'd wanted to see. I'm like, oh, well, what if one of the main characters did this? Or what if, you know, like one of the bad guys had this quality to them? And they explored all of that really well. So I feel like it just fully delivered on what I wanted to see. And that's why I'm not too keen on a season 2 or 3 and watching those. The show doesn't go too deep into anything, but it is really, really interesting and a really cool exploration of the premise. And that's why I'm giving it a medium or recommendation, because it's just solidly fun. It's just really, really good and really enjoyable. And that's what I wanted from it. And so moving into the final 5 shows, 3 out of 5 of these are going to be a little controversial, I think. One that might not piss you off is Hunter x Hunter, the first show that I'll be covering in this last 5. And I had seen Hunter x Hunter after My Hero, I had seen Hunter x Hunter after Demon Slayer, and I had heard a lot of good things about it. Oh, it's one of the best shonen ever, it's amazing. I'd seen it after Jujutsu Kaisen, so I'm like, this is a high standard to live up to. But Hunter x Hunter honestly lived up to my expectations. It was really, really good. A really solid idea for shonen that I think takes the typical things you expect with it and adds just a lot of really cool flavoring to it. The idea of Nen is still really cool to me, because in a lot of shonen, pretty much any others, even Jujutsu Kaisen, the sort of like power system or the way in which everyone fights is just never that interesting, and it's only interesting whenever someone breaks the rules, so to say, or to like whenever a character is going above and beyond. It's never like actually them doing something interesting, it's just them powering up, and it always feels weird. But Nen is so detailed and so explored and so consistent and thought out that all of the fight scenes take on this really amazing quality where you never just feel that like, oh, he just unlocked a new power somehow and beat the bad guy. It's like, oh, he did something to actually win this fight. And people who are less powerful or who have less total Nen ability can beat someone who's more powerful than them because they were more creative with it, which makes the fights instantly more interesting to me. Especially when you can get a villain like Hisoka, who like isn't the most powerful Nen user, but is one of the scariest because he's so good with his power. It's just really, really cool. And the characters are very, very interesting. I think the exploration, especially a lot of the villains, are really, really cool. There are some parts later, because this is a longer show, a longer shonen. There are some parts later that get a little bit boring. Like the game arc had an incredibly weak villain. I can't even remember like a single thing he did. But, you know, you look at people like the Phantom Troop, or you look at Hisoka, you look at a lot of these characters, and they're just really well done and fun to watch. And that I think is kind of the enjoyment of Hunter x Hunter, is that it's so fun. And then you get to the Chimera Ant arc, and I think it's like half the show. It's very long. It's like 100 and something episodes, whereas every other arc is like 20 to 30. It is very boring at parts, and I have no idea why it was so long. And there's so much setup and so many things going on that you just kind of don't care about because they're all leading up to something. But then the end of the Chimera Ant arc happens, and all of those threads that have been leading up to something all unravel at once. And it's like one of the most satisfying things you can watch. The meme of Hunter x Hunter at the end of the show, when it's talking about how like 5 episodes will go on, and then the narrator comes in and says 10 seconds have passed, because every bit of those 10 seconds has been like 50 different characters doing things, is so good and so interesting to me, and something I have not seen another show do in general. And then the exploration of the main characters, especially Gon, was phenomenal, just in a way that I have not seen any other shonen do. To this day, I have not seen any other show really do the same type of subversion that Hunter x Hunter did, because Hunter x Hunter just did it so well. And I don't want to spoil it other than to say to watch it, though it is a show that's like hundreds of episodes long. And also it doesn't have a satisfying conclusion because the manga is still going on and there's no plans to even finish the show. So again, it ends on an unsatisfying note, though the ending of the anime I do think is amazing, in that they knew that they were going to stop it at that point. And so the ending of the newer version of the anime, because I haven't seen the 1999 version, is a satisfying conclusion to me. And it does feel like a satisfying ending where it's like, yeah, we're going to explore these things in the future, but you can imagine that in your head. You don't need to see it. And so overall, to me, Hunter x Hunter just does all of these amazing things in such a well thought out and well done way that I can't give it anything other than a medium recommend. But it is very solid. And then we get to possibly the most controversial opinion I'll give on this video. I don't think I can think of one that's going to be possibly worse received than this one. Possibly. People might somehow agree with me, but I think a lot of people might hate me for this one. And that's Naruto. The show Naruto is possibly, I wouldn't even say possibly, I would think it is the most hyped show of all time. It is so incredibly built up by people, and the culture around it is so incredibly large and intense, to the point where I'm on TikTok and I'll watch tons and tons of anime related TikToks, people talking about anime, and you cannot even go a single TikTok without someone bringing up Naruto, this character versus this character, how cool is Madara, how cool is this character, oh my god, this is amazing. And to have not seen the show up until that point, it was very weird to feel left out. So I felt like I needed to watch Naruto. And I started watching it, and it's very long, and a lot of the show is filler. And now you say filler, and filler in anime terms just means something that's not originally from the manga, so you can basically skip it because it's not the intended plot. But the funny part for me about Naruto is that like 90% of the show is the real filler, because even the parts that aren't filler in terms of being strictly, you know, not canon to the manga, a lot of the show is still just completely inconsequential to the plot. And it felt like a chore to watch this show. There was so much of this show that I was watching that I kept going through and going, I just don't want to watch this, but I need to, because I need to finish this show. And it's not fun or interesting to me, and it's very boring. And there are parts that are amazing. I would say like the Rock Lee versus Gaara fight absolutely earns all of the hype that it's gotten. It's amazing. And fights like that and parts like that are amazing. And there's just so much boring shit in between. Oh my god. It is actually insane to me. And now this is a review of Naruto. I have not seen Naruto Shippuden, and I kind of don't want to, because it's even longer, and if it's not just amazing throughout, I don't know if I'll ever be able to finish that show. So I think I can confidently say that if I do end up watching it, it's going to be over the course of like a couple of years, because I'm going to watch it like an episode a week, because it's very, very hard to get through Naruto, the original show. And everyone hypes up Shippuden more than Naruto, so I'm holding out hope that it's better when I do eventually at some point watch it. But Naruto the OG is very boring and very not great. And it's It's a show that was part of the big three, so I can 100% understand, again, where shows like Jujutsu Kaisen got all of their inspiration from. Like, I'm watching the original. Of course, the thing made afterwards is going to be better because they've learned from the original. And of course, Naruto was so influential that other anime that are better, that I've considered better even on this list, are influenced by Naruto. Wouldn't exist without Naruto. I understand that. And so my controversial opinion is that Naruto goes in the no opinion category. Definitely not a rejection. I would not say the show's bad in any way, but to recommend someone a show, to have them watch 200 episodes, 100 if you cut out the filler, which is then only set up for a 500 episode show afterwards, is insanity to me, especially when it's not amazing from beginning to end. So there is incredibly high standards that I'm putting Naruto up to that it just does not meet at all to me. So I am sorry, Naruto fans. In the year 2026, I'll give a review of Naruto Shippuden, I promise. At some point by then, I'll have seen it, but it's gonna be a while. And so moving on from Naruto, we then move on to a show that I didn't expect to like as much as I did, The Daily Life of the Immortal King, which is a weird title for a show, very long and hard to say sometimes. But this show and the show following it, Saiki K, are sort of two sides of the same coin, where a lot of people would even call Daily Life a ripoff of Saiki K, which is why I'm covering them back to back. And this show is sort of the anti-shonen in the same way that a One Punch Man is, where the main character is the most powerful being. They don't really come across more powerful people that they have to overcome so much as there's more internal conflict and more of an exploration of them being so powerful and sort of dealing with other people and, you know, their weaknesses, other characters who aren't powerful that they need to protect or things like that. And Daily Life, I also understand, is not an anime. It is a Chinese animation that I don't know the name of, and it's going to be on screen right here because I can't think of the name, but it's that. And excuse me as I'm losing my voice because I've been recording for like 3 hours now. But Daily Life of the Immortal King was very, very solid. Very, very enjoyable. Very, very fun to watch. And there's not a lot to talk about because it's not that deep. It's not that amazing. It's not that bad. The animation quality is insane in this show. The characters are very, very fun. And it's this sort of exploration of this powerful main character. And it's a love story, which I didn't expect when I first got into it. And that's really all I want to say about it. I have not much to talk about at this show, and this is one of the last shows after I've been recording so long, so I don't have much energy left to even talk about it. But it is very solid, and I would give this show a solid light recommendation. I would say that if you want to watch this sort of anti-shonen show, like a Mob Psycho or like a Saiki K or One Punch Man, The Daily Life is honestly a really good place to start because it is a very straightforward example of it that is very, very well done. And the sort of not so straightforward version of it is Saiki K, which if you don't know is psychic, and it is an exploration of the main character, which is more of a One Punch Man type show. In fact, going even further than One Punch Man is, where Saiki K is just a straight up comedy. This show is like a slice of life-esque comedy show that is explicitly a comedy. It's explicitly funny. You're not meant to take it seriously at all. The show doesn't take itself seriously. It's almost a Saturday morning cartoon type vibe that you get from it. And in fact, that's how I watched a lot of this show, was like, I'd make myself breakfast and I'd make myself like a good, plate of bacon and eggs, put it down on my table, and I'd watch it on my TV and start my day with it. And it would feel like a cool cartoon show that you're watching to start your day off, like a kid on a Saturday morning. And Saiki K was honestly really, really good. Really, really well done in terms of how funny it is. It's just really goofy. It's just really silly. Like he meets a cat that he's talking to that's, like a psychic cat who wants to be pet and thinks he's better than everyone else. And like, I don't know, there's not a lot to it. It's just good. It's very, very... It's like the cereal of television. You watch it and you just go like, oh, this is good. Doesn't provide me not much nutrition. Doesn't make me think about things. But if you want to turn your brain off, this is perfect to watch. And so I would give Saiki K a light recommend. It's a very, very good show. It's just really, really fun. Really, really interesting. And yeah, check it out. And now, after what I think is 3.5 hours of recording this video, we get to the final show on my list of shows, which is not the last show that I've seen so much as it's, I think, a good ending place. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure.
The story of the Joestar family.
This show is... It's one I probably could make an entire video on its own of. It's bizarre. It lives up to the name fully 100%. It is almost, I would say. In fact, I would say it is impossible to explain to someone who has not seen this show what JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is about. I could not explain the plot to you. Could not begin to explain in what ways it's good and in what ways it's bad, because the ways that it is good is ways in which other shows are bad. When there is a plot hole in a normal show, you go, oh, this normal show is a plot hole. That's a detriment to the show. And if there's a plot hole in JoJo's, it's part of why you enjoy it and part of what makes it funny. It's such a weird show. And I don't think I can explain the show in any way that doesn't reference the meme culture of the show. Because JoJo's Bizarre Adventure seems to have been single-handedly made for meme culture. It is a meme. The show is meme-worthy. The entire, every frame of the show is meant to be used in meme format because it's so well suited for it. And it's so insane, and I can't really describe it in any way that isn't just saying that this show is a shitpost disguised as a shonen. This is a show that's plot is seemingly made up on the spot and an episode-to-episode basis, to the point where it seems like some fights in the show are won by the characters remembering that they have powers. And it is most perfectly, I think, explained like when two kids are fighting in the playground and one of them says, I'm gonna shoot a laser beam, and the other one says, but I have a shield. That's how the fighting in this show actually works. It's just two people making up shit about how they thought ahead of the opponent and just making stuff up on the spot about how their powers work and then using that to defeat people. It's insanity. I think one of my favorite things to do, and it's something that you should do too if you've ever even seen JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, is to show people who haven't seen JoJo's Bizarre Adventure out of context clips of the show because they're hilarious. Like, nothing makes sense, and even if you do have context, it doesn't make much more sense, and that's like the point of the show, and it's incredibly hard to describe, but I would say it's enjoyable for the same reason that you enjoy meme culture. And so really all I can say about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is to watch it and to just never give up. Watch the entire show because it won't ever make sense. And that's all I can really describe it as. And I would definitely give JoJo's Bizarre Adventure a medium recommendation. Hi there, Future Alex here. My original ending to this video really sucked because it was at the end of a 4-hour long recording session. So I had zero energy and zero ability to speak even, and so it just really didn't go that well. So I'm re-recording the ending a week later in order to actually properly conclude this video. Now, first of all, before I get into some later stuff I want to talk about, what did you think of the review? Did you like it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? I mean, I don't know if any of my opinions were too controversial, even though there was a couple of them that I think I ranked a little low or a little higher than some other people might have. So if you did really disagree with any of my reviews, or if you thought I ranked anything too high or too low, I'd love to hear your opinion in a comment down below. And also, as well as concluding this video, I did just want to talk about a couple of things, because this might be the last video that I'm making in 2021. I don't know if I'll necessarily make another one before the end of the year, so I'm just sort of treating this as my last video of 2021 and sort of wrapping up the year with this. And I mean, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you to anyone watching my videos. I really do appreciate each and every person that watches one of my videos, and especially anyone who leaves a like or comments something positive. It does mean a lot to me. I think this year, even in my personal life, which I don't share a lot on this channel because that's not what it's about, has been really transformative for me. At the beginning of the year, I know I talked about it in this video, I wasn't employed, I wasn't in school or anything, and I was sort of depressed. And I think over the course of the year, I've gotten a lot more confident in myself, I've gotten a lot more happy, and I think that has reflected in me making more YouTube videos for you guys. Because YouTube videos are something that I really enjoy making. I really do love the creative process. And even if no one watched these videos, I would continue making them because I just really love pouring my creativity into something like this. It's really something that I've enjoyed since I was a kid. And so to put any creative energy into something and then also to see someone react positively to it is phenomenal. It's so rewarding and just feels so amazing when I get positive comments and likes like that. And so I think this being the end of the year, or at least I'm treating it as the last video that I'm making this year, I just wanted to share a couple of things with you. I mean, first of all, YouTube has sent me an official YouTube, I keep wanting to call it the rewind, but I'm not going to call it this time. I know it's called the recap, I believe, the YouTube recap, which is just sort of all of the statistics of the year, how many views I've gotten, how many likes and all that. And at the end of 2021, I am currently sitting at 84 subscribers and a total yearly view count of 878, which is 84 more subscribers and 878 more views than I thought I would get. So I think I'm doing pretty good. And one of the only reasons I'm even sharing these stats is because I want to continue making videos in 2022. I think closer to the end of this year, I've started to take YouTube more seriously. I've started to actually have some sort of consistency in uploading, even if it's not terribly consistent, because I know it's been about 2 weeks since this last video will have come out. But I do want to keep that going in 2022. And even though I don't have any specific upload schedule that I want to post, just because I know that I would fail that upload schedule as soon as I made it, I do want to consistently make videos and consistently upload them and make more content. Even if it won't be a 2-hour long video like this one, I do just want to make more videos consistently throughout the year. And so I'm sort of sharing my stats for the end of this year because I want to sort of make this type of video, maybe not exactly ranking every video, but some sort of end of year recap of everything I've seen, a sort of tradition on this channel, starting now. So if you want to stick around and see what videos I'm making next year, and hopefully come back next year and see how much I've grown, then please consider subscribing. So whether this is my last video for the year, or I end up uploading another video next week anyways, I hope you have a happy holidays, I hope you have a great 2022, and I'll see you next time.